Several seconds later, the woman regained consciousness, opened her eyes, and while looking at the sky with a surprised expression, she began to wonder where she was and what was happening. She started to sit up with the help of one hand, placed the other on her head, and as she gradually regained consciousness, she began to wonder what kind of place this was. She remembered not having come here. While she had her hand on her head and was slowly trying to understand the situation, Jang approached her, sat down next to her, rested his elbows on his knees, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile, asked if she was awake. Upon hearing Jang's voice, she became alert and began to wonder who he was. Without wasting a second, she stood up and hopped away from him. She adopted an offensive stance and, while looking at Jang, she asked him who he was and also requested that he not approach her. He stood up, turned his body toward her, and with a calm voice, he asked her not to worry since he was just a job changer who had come to the desert to fight monsters. He also added that he hadn't come to harm her. Upon looking more closely, she remembered who Jang was. She placed a hand on her chest, began pointing at Jang with the other, and while staring at him intently, she told him that she knew he was the one who had attacked her before. Upon hearing this, Jang became somewhat nervous, closed his eyes, and with a smile, apologized to her, explaining that he had mistaken her for a monster. Upon seeing that Jang was quite attractive, she couldn't help but blush. She turned her head toward him and asked how anyone could say that beautiful girls like her resembled monsters. She couldn't help but call him presumptuous. She entered into panic, quickly started touching her head and face to see if her nose and ears were still where they should be. Jang simply stayed silently observing her. He had used all his strength when he attacked her, and now, seeing that she still had so much vitality and was acting as if nothing had happened, he began to wonder who she was and how she could withstand his attack. Several seconds later, after checking that she had no injuries, she calmed down. Then, she reached out to the side, and the golden ring on her finger began to shine and emit a green energy. This ring was like a kind of clock, which started projecting the time. Upon seeing the time, she realized that she had wasted too much time. She turned her back on Jang and, while walking away from him, decided to leave quickly before they caught her. While she was slowly moving away, Jang simply remained silent. He began to stare at her intently and started wondering why she was running away and who the people chasing her were. The woman moved away from him a little but suddenly stopped abruptly. She put her hand on her mouth and started biting her nails. Jang didn't take long to realize that something was wrong. He approached the woman, and seeing that she was very nervous, asked if there was any problem. As terror started to take hold of her, she slightly turned her head back, closed her eyes, and forced a smile at him. She replied that there were some monsters ahead, and since she wasn't very good at fighting, she decided to retreat and let Jang deal with the monsters. In a matter of seconds, she stopped being nervous, turned her back to him again, waved goodbye, and told him that this was it before deciding to leave. Upon seeing this, Jang's expression changed drastically. With a confused look, he started looking at the woman and thought that her acting skills were truly a pity. At that moment, it started to rain, and the woman left. Jang began walking around the area and thought that if there were monsters ahead, it was good because this was exactly what he wanted. Since these monsters were not opponents for him, although they gave him devouring points, there was a problem. Jang slightly turned his head to one side, and with a serious look, he thought that dealing with other job changers was going to be difficult. The desert had always been a lawless place where many people dedicated themselves to killing and stealing goods. He began to question whether it was a good idea to capture the woman from before and ask her again. While Jang was lost in his thoughts, little Nine appeared. She started pointing ahead with her finger, and with a serious look, she informed him that there were many monsters approaching from that side. Far from being scared or running away, Jang was happy. He turned his head slightly toward her, and upon hearing that there were many monsters, he told her that this was great. His happiness didn't last long. He turned his head to the side, and upon seeing what was in front of him, he was shocked. In front of him, hundreds of giant spiders appeared, just like the ones he had just defeated. Among them was one even bigger than the rest, which started to look at him with a murderous gaze. As Jang's body was surrounded by powerful energy, he began to look at the spiders and thought that this wasn't good for him. Fighting against some of them wouldn't be a problem, but now that there were so many spiders, he wouldn't be able to confront them. While the giant spiders were getting closer to him, with a serious look, he began to stare at them fixedly and thought that the woman was not lying. Despite being surrounded by monsters, he felt relieved. He preferred to fight against these monsters rather than against the job changers. The giant spiders became enraged and, with a murderous look, they gained momentum and began to advance quickly toward him. Upon seeing this, Jang couldn't help but feel happy, as he had no reason not to want the devouring value that was approaching him. Jang unsheathed the 2 daggers, and as his body emitted a powerful and suffocating energy, he began to stare fixedly at the monsters, giving Little Nine the command to activate the poisonous mist. She did not disobey the order and responded with an understood. At that moment, her poisonous mist began to emerge from the daggers he was holding. In the blink of an eye, the giant spiders approached him, opened their mouths, and prepared to attack. While Jang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he stood still for several seconds. One of the giant spiders tried to attack him, but Jang moved at an incredible speed and, using the daggers and Little Nine's poisonous mist, he gained momentum and, in the blink of an eye, pierced its body, splitting it in half and infecting it with the poisonous mist in the process. While he was in the air, he slightly turned his head back and, while staring fiercely at the monsters with a killer look, he thought this was strange because he didn't know why these monsters had become much faster than before. While Jang was distracted, another giant spider gained momentum and began to advance toward him at high speed. As it slowly approached him, it started staring at him with a murderous look and prepared to attack. Jang didn't take long to feel the presence of the giant spider. Quickly, he slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing that it was trying to attack by surprise, he was somewhat surprised, but for the giant spider's bad luck, Jang was not going to stand idly by. Just before it could make a move, in the blink of an eye, Jang cut its body into pieces using the daggers. The pieces of its body fell to the ground, and several seconds later, Jang landed on the ground while he was holding the 2 daggers with both hands and his body was releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine. With a murderous look, he began to stare at its corpse and realized that this wasn't right. Although he had reacted in time to the attack and had ended its life in the blink of an eye, he had received a small cut on his abdomen in the process. At that moment, the small spiders began to advance rapidly toward him, and he didn't take long to realize that these monsters were actually cooperating with each other. Upon closer inspection, Jang saw a spider that was very different from the rest. This spider had 6 eyes and was much larger, so he quickly came to the conclusion that this spider was the boss. Upon seeing this, he began to question whether this boss was commanding the others. In the blink of an eye, thousands of spiders appeared and surrounded Jang. While his body was releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, he started staring at the boss and, instead of running away, he simply stood still. Jang finally understood that the thousands of monsters living in this area had the same strength strategy, both in numbers and tactics, so it was not surprising that no one came here. With a serious look, Jang began to stare at the boss and thought that the only way to defeat these small monsters was by killing the boss. Upon seeing the number of monsters present, he thought this was going to be a bit difficult. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine emerged through the poisonous mist and placed her hand on his shoulder, getting his attention. As she slowly manifested herself with a serious look on her face, she began to stare directly at the boss and explained to Jang that she was able to understand the situation. She revealed that these monsters were trying to challenge their master. Upon hearing this, Jang became somewhat confused. He turned his head slightly toward her and asked what she was talking about. Little Nine thought that these monsters were really arrogant. She extended her hands to the sides, started looking up at the sky, opened her mouth, and let out a loud roar. Upon hearing Little Nine's roar, the spiders finally realized that she was the insect mother, and without a second thought, all the little spiders began to flee. Seeing the spiders fleeing in disarray, Jang was somewhat surprised and started wondering if the reason could be that these monsters were also insects. Little Nine approached Jang, slightly turned her head toward him, and informed him that she had severed the connection between the boss and the little spiders. Jang did not expect that Little Nine's skills could be used in this way. Now that the monsters were disoriented, it was going to be much easier for him to defeat them. He extended the 2 daggers to the sides, and while staring at the boss with a murderous look, he praised Little Nine for doing a good job and decided that it was time to finish off the boss once and for all. Upon hearing this, Little Nine began to return to her original form. She started staring at the boss with a murderous look and replied with an understood, "Master." While Jang's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine, he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and ordered her to follow closely. In the blink of an eye, using his daggers, he ended the lives of several monsters, cutting their bodies into pieces. He no longer had to worry about anything since, without the boss's control, these monsters were in disarray. Jang began to move at a high speed toward the monsters, and using his daggers, he started cutting their bodies into pieces. Now that the monsters were scattered and disorganized, they no longer posed a threat to him, so he didn't need to waste any more time. In a matter of seconds, Jang finished off several monsters. Then, he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and as he was advancing quickly toward the boss, he thought that now there was only one objective left. The boss opened its mouth, and with a murderous look, it began to stare at Jang and roar. Jang decided not to back down and returned the gaze. He prepared himself to attack and thought that the boss was the one who could provide the highest devouring value. The boss tried to defend itself, but it was in vain. Just before it could make a move, Jang descended upon it and swiftly attacked its head with both daggers, infecting it with Little Nine's poisonous mist in the process. Despite the difference in size, within seconds it lost its life and fell to the ground. Jang landed on top of the boss's corpse as he held both daggers in his hands. His body began to emit the venomous mist of Little Nine. He stared fixedly at its lifeless body and decided that it was time to breed the swarm of insects. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.